People still like to say it wasn't a Polish thing, it was a German thing, it was the Nazis, it wasn't us. Of course, we know that that's not true.
This is Faith Complex, a conversation about religion, politics, and art.
Hi, I'm Alexa Ryan West, and you're watching Faith Complex. Today we have Allison Hoffman, a senior writer at Tablet Magazine, an online magazine for Jewish news, culture, and ideas. Thanks for coming.
Sure, I'm happy to be here.
You're presently working on an article about the Museum of the History of Polish Jews, set to open in Warsaw next year.
That's right.
What turned you onto this project?
The story of it is really incredible, but for Tablet's readership, it's an obvious thing to write about. The museum is really positioning itself as being sort of the third leg of a stool that includes the Holocaust Museum in Washington and Yad Vashem, and they really want to be the repository of this historical story of Ashkenazi Jews.
Right, and you say it's the third leg of that stool, but what makes it different than the Yad Vashem? It's
not a museum of the Holocaust at all. There's no attempt to retell that story in any great detail. The Holocaust is part of the sweep of the museum, but it's really a museum that tells a 1,000-year history, and so something that we're not used to seeing. The Holocaust becomes one gallery out of many in
So it's celebrating life.
That's what they say. It is celebrating life. It's a museum of Polish life, not Polish death.
Let's talk about the location of the museum. What's significant about putting it in the Warsaw Ghetto as opposed to Treblinka, Majdanek, Auschwitz, or other notable areas of Jewish history in Poland?
Well, again, it's a museum that really celebrates the history of Jewish life in Poland rather than what the Poles and certainly Polish government officials really see as the very brief and unfortunate history of Polish Jewish death, which not a few people still like to say it wasn't a Polish thing, it was a German thing, it was the Nazis, it wasn't us. Of course, we know that that's not true. An effort was made to place it in the city of Warsaw, partly to position it where Polish Jewish life happened, but also
accessibility,
but also really as a way to draw visitors into the city, because now you have tour groups who come from the United States, they come from Europe, they come from Israel. And for the most part, there's a very limited set of places that they go. They go to the Jewish cemetery in Warsaw, they might go to see the remainders of the ghetto walls, and they go to the camps. And Poles say, wait a second, we have a whole country where your ancestors lived for millennia, and you should come see it and get to know us. And so that's part of it too.
So the opening of this museum has made you examine some broader themes of the Jewish-Polish history. Can you tell me something you found surprising in your research?
Well, it's really incredible how little I think I knew, and I would say most American Jews know about this history, and certainly Polish students don't necessarily know the extent of Jewish involvement in what is a Polish history. But Jews arrived in Poland in the 900s, so the end of the medieval era. They were pushed out of towns in Germany, and Poland actually was a hospitable place, and they stayed for 1,000 years, as not a few people said to me, not because it was terrible, they stayed because it was actually a relatively good place to live. So the early history of Poland as a monarchy and a rising power is really actually very much a Jewish history. And that I didn't know. Everybody knows about Hasidism and the 18th century and the 19th century, but people don't know about what was going on in the 14 and 1500s.
There's more to Polish Jewish history than the Holocaust or the shtetl.
That's exactly right. And in fact, shtetl is just a word that means town. So of course, the Poles say, well, wait a second, what are you talking about, this shtetl? It's not Fiddler on the Roof in Anatevka, it's just a town. And Jews were part of towns just like Tatars and Swedes in some cases, and everybody else. So.
Over the past 20 years, we've seen the Polish government invest a lot in Jewish museums, Jewish entertainment, and Jewish tourism. Why do you think that's happening? And more importantly, why do you think that's happening now?
Well, the now is easy to answer. I mean, the Polish government, after the fall of communism in 1989, the Solidarity government that came in wanted to make a very clear effort to join the West, to be a democracy, and really in a lot of ways to regain what they see as a lost position of Polish dominance and leadership in Middle Europe. And so investing in these things is a way of asserting that. But a lot of it has been in partnership. There are a number of American donors. Ronald Lauder has been extraordinarily generous in building Polish Jewish life and underwriting cultural festivals, museums, synagogues. And so in a lot of cases, including with this museum, what the Polish government has done has been a partner much more than a lead. And they've said, we welcome you into our country and bring this back for us.
Are there any people who are skeptics of this project, thinking the museum might be a little disingenuous? And if there are, can you tell us about them?
I spoke to one Holocaust survivor who actually leads teen tours. She lives in Los Angeles, and she immediately said to me, well, you know, the Polish government, all they're interested in is tourism and looking good and looking like they're not anti-Semites. It's a totally legitimate position. It's very hard to look at somebody who's a Holocaust survivor and say, you know, what the Poles will say, which is, we've changed, we've educated our children, we are very close to Israel, we're very close to America, believe us. There are people who will never be convinced. It's possible that there really are disingenuous motives, but as several people who are associated with the museum have said to me, look, what difference does it make? At the end of the day, you have this gigantic museum in the middle of Warsaw that really celebrates the Jewish aspects of Polish history. And so at a certain point, the motives fall away.
Yeah.
And so where you fall on that, you know, some of the questions really going forward will be about what the temporary exhibits are like and how deeply they want to probe. It's interesting, within the Polish context, the question is not actually about how to deal with the Holocaust aspect of Poland's history and who cooperated with the Nazis and who collaborated and who was righteous and who didn't. The real point of contention within Poland is how to deal with the question of what's known as Jewish communism, which was really, for a long time, under communist rule, was a way for opponents of the communist government to sort of smear Jews. And the idea is that, you know, Jews somehow enabled the communist regime to last longer. It goes back and forth, but there is a lot of tension about that issue, but that's something that really only plays in the domestic dimension, and it doesn't actually translate out to visitors from the US or from Israel so much. So,
now what's actually going to be inside the museum? What type of exhibits?
The museum is actually, it's beautiful. It's been designed by a Finnish architect. The upstairs part has a view of the Warsaw Ghetto Monument, so you never forget where you are and what present you're living in, that it's a post-war present. But the bulk of the exhibit will be underground and downstairs. And it's a narrative museum, so really it's set up to depict Polish Jewish history, and it starts in the year, I think, 900 something, with an actual forest that they'll construct out of metal and whatever else. But the idea will be that it recreates this foundational myth of Jews in Poland, that they were fleeing Germany and fleeing persecution, and they walked onto Poland's green lands and into the forest, and they heard the voice of God saying, "You will rest here," which the word for that apparently is Polin.
Great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.